Hey there, educator. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Lanisha, and I'm all about helping educators make meaningful connections in math instruction. If you've ever attended one of my live professional development sessions, then you know how truly passionate I am about this teacher life. PD for the Soul is my space for providing professional development on the go, where you can take what you need and place the rest on the shelf for another day. New episodes drop every Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is where we will dive into strategies, routines, and insights to help students build deeper understanding. And here's something new. Our monthly newsletter launches on March 1st. This will be your go-to spot for links to all resources we discuss on the podcast. I want you to have everything in one place. Plus, I'll share the books that will shape upcoming solo episodes in case you want to read along. But that's not all. The newsletter will also explore connections across domains and grade levels, because when we keep those connections at the core of our instruction, we give students the tools to make generalizations that make new concepts more accessible. So, hit subscribe, stay connected, and let's make math happen. See you in the episode. Welcome back to PD for the Soul, the podcast designed to nourish, inspire, and empower educators. I'm Lanisha, and today we're diving into a conversation that every teacher needs to hear: how Maslow's hierarchy of needs can help us shift from simply surviving to truly thriving in our profession. Teaching is more than just lesson plans and assessments. It's an emotional, mental, and even physical journey. But when teachers are constantly running on empty, how can we create sustainable well-being? To explore this, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Poole Jones, a mental health expert, who will help us break down how meeting our foundational needs can transform not only our classrooms, but also our lives. So whether you're feeling overwhelmed or just looking for ways to better care for yourself as an educator, this episode is for you. Let's start with an introduction. Dr. Poole Jones, can you tell the people who you are?
Thank you for having me. So, as you stated, my name is Dr. Poole Jones, and I am a doctor of psychology. I have a PsyD in clinical psychology, and a little bit of my background, all things mental health. I've trained as a generalist, so I have experience working with adults and children with various different diagnoses, ranging from severe and persistent mental illness to some of the adjustment disorders and mood disorders. In regards to clinical practice, I do have two specialties: forensics, so individuals transitioning out of prison that require mental health treatment, and also chronic pain management. And in regards to my research interests, I published an article for a textbook on anxiety disorders. And I also am really, really big on social media and mental health. And so I absolutely love the opportunity to join talks like the one you're having today, as I can highlight how useful they are according to research, but also how necessary it is for people to consume positive reflections and thoughts like tonight's. I'm sure it's going to be. So thank you again for having me.
I am excited. I'm so excited. We've had so many conversations offline just about mental health and goal setting and just making sure that teachers or people in general are in a space that we can really tackle those goals. Because when we think about Maslow's hierarchy of need, there's things that are at the top. And if those things are not taken care of, then it's difficult for us to handle some of those other things that are not a priority at the time. So I want us to kind of think about foundationally, thinking about physiological and safety. So teaching is an incredibly demanding job. Now, I know as a professor, you already feeling it. You in education too now, sis. So how do these physiological needs like sleep, nutrition, and personal well-being impact a teacher's ability to show up fully for their students?
Absolutely. I'm glad we're starting there, because most often people want to start right with self-actualization. How do I reach it? But as you previously mentioned, we need to go through the previous stages and ensure security before we can move on. So there's tons of research on sleep and the lack thereof. And also when people are sleeping too much could be indicative of other things. So having what we call sleep hygiene, so a routine in which you try to follow, is going to be best practice, as the literature constantly reflects how poor sleep can lead to so many things. One thing, it can impact your mood. So if you've had a poor sleep the night before class, when you get in class, you're more likely to be distracted and become irritated because of the lack of sleep. But interestingly, something I don't think people know, and it's just kind of a tidbit that's relevant, is that we can have dysfunctional beliefs about sleep that also impact our mood. There's actually a screener called the DBAS, and it's dysfunctional beliefs about sleep. So when looking at setting your sleep hygiene routine, it's important to look at your age and other factors to determine what's the appropriate amount of sleep. Most adults can get 6 to 8 hours of sleep each night and they're going to be okay. But let's say we have a teacher that's telling herself, if I don't get 10 hours or if I don't get this amount, then I'm not going to be able to function and the kids are going to get on my nerves. That dysfunctional belief about sleep can actually also influence the mood. So I don't mean to complicate things, but I do want to highlight the importance of not just, getting some sleep, but getting enough sleep and getting quality sleep.
Wow. So there is, you said DBAS. So is that something that anybody can access? Is it like paid? Is it free where I can go up there and figure out how much sleep I can get? Because I think that is huge. What we're thinking about, if I'm not getting adequate amounts of sleep, my mood is off, I'm distracted, I'm irritable, but I could be blaming it on other things, not realizing it's sleep that's causing all of these things. I'm telling you that these kids is bad, but maybe the kids aren't bad. Maybe you are a little more easy to be irritated today because you didn't get sufficient enough sleep.
Yes, that is exactly correct. And so I just Googled the DBAS. It is something that you can Google and find. However, do not quote me on if it looks like it's copywritten. And so depending on what you're using it for, you may need additional permissions to utilize it in your class or different things. I'm not sure about that. But just to add a little bit more, I would encourage people to kind of start with their primary care. I think that's another thing that teachers also have to increase mindful of, and not just teachers. I'm going to say teachers throughout my chat because that's the group we're targeting. But I do think it's important to speak with a professional about any of these things. I do love social media. So again, I'm happy about different tests and quizzes and people can take. But when it comes to health, and when it comes to mood, impacts so many areas of life, I would start by saying if anyone thinks that they need to improve their sleep quality, speaking to their primary care could be helpful. And that kind of ties into CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's based off the cognitive model, which says it's not the situation, it's the way we think about it. Because our thoughts control our feelings and our feelings control our behaviors. So as we go on, I'd like to give a more detailed example of reinforcing the example you just gave about poor sleep, coming into the classroom, student is doing something they always do, but the teacher is experiencing increased anxiety or frustration with this student, and it's less about the student and more about the teacher.
The interesting thing about it is the fact that the first thing I wanted to do is it a link? Can we go to the quiz? Can I figure out how many hours of sleep? When really the first stop needs to be your primary care physician. We need to consult the expert. Why are we going online with all this AI out here? Go ahead and consult your physician and get the information that you need pertaining specifically to you. The next part is that classroom safety. So we're talking about the physical and emotional. We know that it's a concern, especially with all these videos going around, altercations between teachers and students. So just the overall feeling unsafe in the classroom, whether that is student behavior, whether that is school policies, whatever the external factors could be, how does that impact a teacher's ability to fully be present and effective? And I would love for you to get into the example that you said you might talk about later. I'm hoping that you dive right on in.
This is the perfect time for me to do that. I want to be mindful that thoughts and feelings are not interchangeable, but we often utilize them. This is me getting deep into my clinical bags. I hope I'm not too clinical so that everyone can follow me. CBT, as I indicated earlier, is based off the cognitive model. CBT was actually created by a physician here in Philadelphia who saw patients and noticed that their thoughts significantly contributed to their mood. With CBT, it's not the situation, it's the way we think about it. It's separating thoughts and feelings. It's a thought that my classroom is not safe. It's a thought that a student could act out and misbehave. It's a thought that a student may be recording this lecture and antagonizing me so that I'll act out. All of those things are thoughts. It's the thought that I could go to school today and a student stab me or some other altercation could happen. Those are all thoughts, which lead to feelings. If I thought all of those things about my job, regardless of if I'm making $25,000 a year, $75,000 a year, or $250,000 a year, that's going to increase some anxiety because those are all negative thoughts about the work environment. which will lead to a feeling of anxiety or frustration or other negative emotional states. I want people to separate their thoughts and feelings when they're going to things, because here's another thing. Our thoughts aren't always facts, but we treat them as such. An example unrelated to the classroom is to just say, if you and I are looking outside and we see clouds, right? So we're in the same situation. Let's say your thought is that clouds mean an umbrella, so that's what you grab. And my thought is that clouds mean cold. Who's right? Because you have a thought and I have a thought. And so that just lets you know that when we have these thoughts, we treat them as facts and we follow through. So neither one of us check the weather, but both of us have some sort of step that we've taken to equip ourselves. So taking this and translating this to your discussion about safety in the classroom, we have to go on thoughts about what could happen versus facts about like what has happened. Because a lot of times the media will sensationalize things. We'll see children acting out. It could be a video from 10 years ago. I encourage people to, one, be mindful of where they consume, especially teachers, information. Is this something that happened 10 years ago and they're resurfacing it? Secondary to that, looking at the frequency. Is this something that has happened in your area or near? What's the likelihood? Do you have a school that has metal detectors, or do you have a school that has over 8,000 students? Do you know the history, instead of just allowing sensationalized media to cause us to have these thoughts about our own classrooms that simply aren't true? However, I digress to say, I do not believe any teacher should go into an environment that they are aware is dangerous. Like, I have to highlight physical safety first. So I am saying, do not go into a place where your thought is, I'm not going to be safe because I have proof of something. I'm just saying, with a lot of the individuals that I work with, because at one time I had like maybe 90% caseload of teachers, a lot of the thoughts were anxious thoughts, thinking too far in the future about things they can't control, or too far in the past about things they can't change. And through therapy, they were actually able to see that their thoughts were anxious thoughts, and the probability of these hypothetical situations that they've seen on the internet actually happen in their school had been minimized. But again, to, bring things full circle, if there are individuals that are concerned about safety, before going back into that classroom, you immediately have to address administration.
So we've talked about this physiological and this whole safety idea. Now, what impact do you think belonging or connection has on all of that?
These are my favorite two to talk about, the loving and belonging and esteem. So Maslow, the hierarchy kind of defines loving and belonging as friendship, intimacy, family, and a sense of connection. I do believe it's absolutely necessary in academia. As you stated, I'm a professor now, so I know, but prior to being a professor, I provided direct patient care. And transitioning into academia, even as seasoned as I was as a clinician, was definitely intimidating because it was new. I credit my network and mentorship with really assisting me with that transition. I believe it's so important in education because, one, networking and having a sense of connection can provide validation. Maybe you had a day that wasn't the best. And, having a mentor or someone senior to you kind of admit that, those days are going to come. I've had those before, but look at me, fast forward now. That can increase the likelihood of being resilient. And I define resilience as recovering quickly from difficult situations. So you can have mentorship that will allow you to feel supported in some of the things that you've done. And also, too, having that social connection can help you problem solve. In education, oftentimes you have your curriculum and your lesson plan, but things don't always go as planned, and maybe some sort of problem pops up. Having a network that you can speak to about those things without rejection or alienation will heighten your ability to thrive in that role, because the thought is, I'm supported, people like me, I've been reinforced in doing well. And everything isn't just a critical session of if you're meeting the academic goal or if your students are passing. It's a sense of community that just highlights, hey, I understand where you're going, either because I'm there with you or because I've been there at some point in time.
Listening to that response, it makes me think just that belonging and that connection really has a huge impact on possibly like overall effectiveness of the teacher, like their ability to do their job well, because I do know I have someone that I can bounce ideas off of. I have somebody that can pour into me. I have somebody that I can collaborate with. And maybe that would be something that would encourage me to return to the job the next year. Even if I've had a challenging year, just knowing that I have someone there that I can connect with, whether in that building, whether in that district, whether somebody even virtually, just having the connection or having that sense of belonging, that network makes it a little bit better or easier for me to handle.
I wanted to add one more point because I love talking about the literature. So I was informed that the literature supports what they call cohort hires. So cohort hires would be when two friends or pairs or groups are actually hired together to increase the likelihood of retention in that role. I actually, in my role as a professor, I was a cohort hire. And because everyone else in the program had been teaching for 20 or more years. So just imagine me coming into that setting, how impactful that could have been depending on my personality. Not to say that everybody would be impacted, but it could be, a little intimidating for some. It was intimidating for me to be with so many seasoned professors, but I was a cohort hire. And one of my colleagues actually referenced that the literature says that that's an initiative that a lot of organizations are utilizing, and they are seeing positive benefits. So it's not just you and I's opinion or us connecting the dots. This is facts.
I love the facts. One of the things I put in the show notes is we talking about research-based stuff. We're not talking about opinions because we know everybody has those. We're talking about something that is facts, something that holds some weight, stands on business. Now, that was a perfect segue to how can schools and districts create environments that foster this connection or this collaboration. And I think you just gave us an excellent idea is to do the cohort hires. So are there any other ideas that you have where schools or districts or anybody else could put in place to kind of foster that?
The first one absolutely would be the cohort hire and looking at individuals that are kind of hired together. And even with my cohort hire, the other professor and I, we actually graduated together. So a cohort hire could simply be hiring two of the same level positions, even if they don't know each other and they kind of know that they're being hired together. One other initiative I'm thinking of is in my department, we have what's called the fund committee. And so that's where someone is responsible for sponsoring funds. So whether that's going to be we all get online and do a virtual chat and chew for 30 minutes because everyone's busy. That's something low stakes and low maintenance to do, but you also could do something face to face to kind of support that camaraderie. And although it may not be something that individuals want to, do ongoing, the literature has shown the benefits of this type of engagement and activity. I think it would be best served if it could be happening during maybe time that an individual is supposed to be at work. Like it doesn't always have to be something that, it's an extra thing I have to do after work to increase the likelihood of participation. Another thing that has been helpful is having this mentorship. We have mentorship programs from alumni that we're able to seek it, and also professional organizations. I would encourage individuals, even in districts, to maybe pay for membership into a professional organization for a year. When I was a student, my program paid for us to become members of the American Psychological Association, and you go to the national conference and you meet others with your specific interests because academia is broad. So if you have teachers that are teaching two different things, two different levels, joining a professional organization could increase the likelihood that you can meet someone whose interest is very, very specific and closely related to yours. So those are just some of the few common popular ones that could be done within a week or less and don't require heavy planning. One thing that does require more heavy planning, but I also think it could be helpful, would be a retreat. My organization also offers yearly faculty retreats. And with that, we have food, we have strategic planning, we break off in clusters, and that fosters interaction with individuals that are in your program, but you may not interact with as much just due to various factors.
I do have a couple of administrators that do engage in this podcast, so I know they will definitely be able to benefit from the things that you shared this evening. Now, we got to have another conversation just about personality, because I think people can still have these things going on in their school, but maybe because of their personality, it still don't hit. And it's still preventing them from creating a culture of collaboration within their school. So we're going to talk about that another day, but I do feel like that could probably send us down a rabbit hole. But we've been talking about these relationships between the adults, but what impact does the relationship between the students? How do you think that contributes to overall job satisfaction and then that teacher well-being?
Tremendously. Not to get too tangential, but research on different teaching environments and the mental health of various teachers. So like maybe private schools where you have smaller classrooms or charter schools, those interactions are definitely impactful, but it always goes back to what your thought is. If your thought is there's too many kids in this class, I don't need to be teaching them A, B, C, D, E, F, G, well, then no matter where you go, it could be problematic. But that interaction is very important. I think that I've realized that personally, just to share myself, and working with students on a doctoral level, there's like a certain level of maturity that I expect, that I don't know how my mood may be impacted if I were to transition to a level where you may not can expect as much maturity because they're younger. So I encourage teachers to think about that. I think that I read a study in preparation for this where it kind of discussed teacher like classroom preference in the grades that they teach, but the need for employment kind of trumping everything. Like we talked about that safety. So if you have to secure the bag to secure housing, then you may just assume a grade that you're not interested in, get in that classroom and say, oh, I hate teaching. Teaching isn't for me. And that's actually an unhelpful thought. And it could be an irrational thought. It could not be that teaching is not for you. It could be that maybe you need a more mature group or you need to teach a different type of subject in regards to that. So definitely influential, the student population and the behaviors that the teachers have to deal with in addition to teaching. So that's huge. I don't want to minimize that at all. I want to highlight that and highlight some things to ask yourself before you jump out of academia, because I know a lot of teachers sometimes will say, oh, I don't want to do teaching no more. It's not for me. And after further exploration, we realize that it's just a pivot instead of a full move out of that, field.
I really want to eventually, we might not be able to do it tonight, but I would love to take some time to think about what CBT things, measures could we be using every day? If there are any specific things that teachers could be doing every day to combat some of those thoughts, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about the thoughts that I know teachers are having when they're going into the classroom. For example, too many kids are in the classroom. They're thinking about there being too many kids in the classroom. They're thinking about what kids can't do. They're thinking about the overwhelm from the meetings that they have today. They're thinking like all of the thoughts surrounding the negative stuff that I know is kind of monopolizing all of this and is totally impacting their mood whenever they go into the classroom. And I'm just wondering what impacts that has on the lesson, because you've already kind of set yourself up for something negative to take place simply because of your thought going into it.
There's a whole theory on that. So let me say this is something that I've called, we're naturally negative thinkers. You have to be positive on purpose. So teachers, I want you to know that even though I'm spitting this clinical stuff, I see you, I feel you, I understand. I'm just trying to help you change and be goal-oriented towards enjoying the space you're in until you transition out of it. So going back to the negativity, it's actually biological. And, according to my research and how I've been trained, it comes from a time where we needed to be and think more negatively. Now we have the Ring app, we have all of these, everything is developed and built, but our negative thoughts come from a time when we didn't have all of those things. And if you heard something rumbling in the background or heard some noise, you needed to be suspicious about what it was. Fast forward to 2025, we really don't need to be that negative, but we still are. So you have to be intentional. So I actually do have a tip for anyone listening to this. There is a trauma-informed model, and it's called the sanctuary model. And even though we're not talking about trauma, what I love about this and from my training that I've taken with me is there's a thing called the sanctuary check-in. And when I did my third year practicum, it was an organization under Catholic Charities, which is under the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And long story short, we would do sanctuary every time. And when you do that, you kind of like do it for yourself, but you also do it for your community that you're working with. So it's very easy, and it's 3 parts. So the first part is, what's my mood? So, you really are supposed to do it with like a circle of people, your network. So teachers, principals, whoever, would like to do this, you can do this with your team or you can do it independently. So the first part of the check-in is, what's my mood? So that way you're already identifying, I'm grumpy, I'm agitated, I'm pissed. You're in tune with all of these thoughts that are true. It is true your classroom has too many students. It is true that you have all of these meetings today that you don't have time for. All of these things are true. Okay. And so with that, you have to see how you're feeling. Are you feeling like just jaded or burnt out because, you're used to it? Are you feeling blah? Whatever that feeling is, Part 2 is what's my goal for today? I think that's the thing that I love the most about the check-in, because my first time participating in it, I had to pause and think, like, I have routines, I have goals for the week. I don't always set like daily goals, but then the third part of the check-in is who can help me achieve that goal. And so that's helping build a sense of community. So like, let's say my mood is I'm happy, and my goal today was to prepare myself for this interaction with you. And then the third part was who could help me reach that goal. And you helped me reach that goal. You asked me, was I going to still be available? I penciled it in on my calendar. I drank some coffee earlier today and I organized my schedule. So sometimes you need help from others and you have to give yourself permission to get help. Or sometimes it's simply something you can do on your own. Like, let's say that if I use the scenario where I'm a teacher and I'm getting ready to go into this classroom with all these kids, there's too many kids, I'm underpaid, and I have meetings with somebody I really don't even feel like meeting with. So my feeling is I am overwhelmed. What's my goal for today? Okay, my goal for today is to reduce feeling overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed on a 10. Okay, well, who's going to help me reach that goal? You know what? My girl Leslie. She always can tell a joke to make me smile. And even though my overwhelmed feeling may not go to 0, I'm a lot better if I can at least get it to 5. So in that case, I'm going to reach out to Leslie and I'm going to say, hey, Leslie, this is kind of how, feeling. Can you help me with this? Or maybe I won't tell her how I'm feeling. I'll just say, hey, look, send me all of the memes on Instagram today between 12 and 12:30, girl, because I'm going to need a good laugh. So it's really about being intentional, because we absolutely are able to control our moods much more than we sometimes like to believe.
So I'm glad that you gave us an example from that teacher's perspective as well as your perspective, because I was taking notes, because I was like, I'm about to come right behind you with an example. And I'm thinking about the teachers that I support when I'm at the school, whether it's Monday, and obviously we just came back from the weekend. We got all these things set up for the week that we need to do. We got all these meetings coming up. So I'm even thinking about, is this something that I could have, obviously the first thing in the morning? It seems like it could also be something I have at the beginning of my class as well. So we have this thing where we have our professional learning community meetings. So I'm thinking about starting the meeting with, what's our mood? Let's get it on out of the table. Now, what is our goal that we want to accomplish today within our classroom? So making it a little bit more specific to, it could be personal as well, but then I want to add on that content specific goal as well. And then asking them who can help you achieve that goal. And then if it's, I just need somebody to help get me some copies. That's one less thing I got to worry about. Or I need somebody to come to this period of class because I know the kids are going to be off the chain because it's our lunch period and I just need help. Okay, bet. I'm going to come in there with you. So starting our meetings that way so that we can go ahead and figure out what's going on and go ahead and start putting things in place to support that teacher so that they don't feel like they're going into the day by themselves.
Absolutely. And let me add this, the way that it's intended to work, if you're going to use it in that setting, which I think is great, is it's not intended to be long-winded and it's not intended for anybody to pry. So if I say that I'm sad, sanctuary is not a time for you to ask me, why am I sad? Or for me to elaborate on being sad, because I don't have to share that. It's a chance for, after that check-in, you can come up to me and say, hey, in our morning huddles today, like I said, this is where the sense of community is being built. I noticed in the huddle today, anybody that heard that can go one-on-one and say, I heard in the huddle today, you mentioned you were sad. Is there anything I can do to support you? We can check in about. But it's not intended. That's how you can do such an impactful check-in in a short amount of time. So if I ask you, you need to ask someone else. So you would model it for your team, but then everybody would get a chance to ask the person. So, I would say it to you. You would say it to Lisa. Lisa says it to Jamila. Jamila says it to Tiffany. And it kind of operates in that way of just 3 parts. So the person knows that they don't have to elaborate on why they're sad. The goal doesn't have to be, like you said, long, but I love that you're setting it with, to be specific to the classroom so it's applicable and that it's being helpful.
That point about it being concise, you're talking to my heart, because I love something that is short, sweet, and to the point. Because I love my teachers, but I think sometimes we get caught up in sharing all of these feelings and emotions, and it's a lot of times it's about things we really can't even control. So I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole. Let's just go ahead and identify whatever it is that we're feeling, and let's keep moving. Let's get it out and let's
you probably could use a timer, okay? Like, honestly, in saying that with the number of people we have, it's only intended to be a 5-minute check-in. because we're not going into details about anything. Now, if a person gets stuck, of course, if they're like, I don't know who can help me reach that goal, but they got to have their goal. If they don't know, skip to the next person. Okay, well, I'll come back to you and I'll go to so-and-so, because at this point, so-and-so has heard what the questions are and they're prepared to answer.
It's so important for teachers to be that in tune with themselves. Like maybe this activity forces you to address what it is that you are feeling so that we can then work towards putting things in place so that those thoughts and those feelings don't manifest into some behaviors that might be negative.
Correct. And honestly, the emotion and the goal don't have to be attached. So like, let's say that I'm sad and then my goal is to finish a report. Like, and then, well, who can help you reach that goal? Coffee. So again, like, sometimes it's not like that, oh, well, why were you sad? Or, if I'm sad, my goal is to not be sad anymore. It doesn't have to always flow linearly like that.
I like it. I like it. Okay. So the whole point of this podcast is for professional development. So one of the things that I feel is super important is confidence. Like teachers need to have confidence in their content. They need to have confidence in their pedagogy. So what are some factors that influence a teacher's sense of competence and their professional self-esteem?
In various settings, because, I'm sending this out to my network. And so when I'm saying teachers, I'm using teachers and professors interchangeably because professors teach. I would say setting a SMART goal is going to be useful. Confidence is very abstract and everybody defines confidence differently. And I know for me, my confidence wasn't going to peak until I had experience and familiarity. That's where I feel most confident. Coming in new to academia, I needed to really focus on what was going to make me think I was more confident. And so really, again, thoughts, feelings, behaviors. You're likely to feel more confident if your thought is, for me, my thought was I needed to join professional organizations. I needed to see what other people were doing outside of my network, and I needed to develop a network of support outside of my organization. Professional organizations are on the national level, the state level, the regional level. So if like you're interested in teaching a certain grade or a certain subject, maybe join in a professional organization so that you can see and be reinforced that what you're doing in the classroom is correct. Another thing would be different trainings and certifications. So I was talking to someone that works in HR recently, and we were having a discussion around like CEs, not necessarily if they're not required, a lot of people don't take advantage of them. But please use more than just Facebook and TikTok to learn what you need to teach these children. I think a lot of professionals and educators now, adults and younger, are using AI to utilize these things. And sometimes you need a live person that's going to teach you. So you need to invest in yourself. Maybe you can look at your employer investing. Maybe you can find something free that's going to assist in building that confidence. But the people that are most confident are the people that have the most positive thoughts about what they're doing. And usually it stems from the enrichment that they've poured into themselves, be it from being in professional organizations and holding professional titles. If it's because, they have supervisors that are writing great reviews about them. One other thing that I don't know if it happens in your level of education, and you can educate me, where does teacher quality assurance, how is that measured? Like, do the students give the teachers feedback at the end of the year, or how do the teachers know what they're doing? Like if it's being effective.
So teachers can create their own surveys, but it's not a requirement. I do have some colleagues that do that. However, generally speaking, they are being evaluated by administration. So the same way that Principal Gillespie, who was on a recent episode, she would do evaluations on her teachers. So depending upon your level in your career, how many years you've been working, that would determine how many evaluations take place throughout the course of a year. So they would go into your classroom and observe you on specific competencies.
Okay.
Yep. And so they would have a professional development plan that they're working towards over the course of that year based on what that principal or the administrator sees.
So I think that could help build confidence as well. If you have a clear map of what you're trying to achieve, and then you can show proof that you did actually achieve it. But to add to that, I would say that, because sometimes there could be a discrepancy. Your administrator may be saying like, hey, I want you to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. But if you have your students that are like, oh, we love Miss So-and-so when she come in, I love that, then that can, really balance things. So you might not be feeling as confident after getting your administrator's evaluation, but you know what? You're willing to stick with it from your students. Because again, like you said, we need a whole nother chat about personality, because administrative personality can influence safety as well. And I definitely have some thoughts about that, just in regards to when you're talking about safety, individual that you're working under, are you reaching their goals for you, or are your goals in alignment with what they want, and it's truly collaborative and shared? And also too, are you only weighing your confidence based on how well your students perform on different types of assessments and exams? So again, we would need to operationally define what confidence looks like for the individual, and then encourage them to reach goals that would do that. Like I said, for me, it was joining professional organizations, it was becoming published, and it was having additional things that I'm doing outside of just teaching in the classroom. And so that has increased my confidence.
Thank you so much for sharing that. One thing that I wrote down was we have to have positive thoughts about what it is that we're doing, and that's going to impact that confidence. So I'm glad that you said they need to identify or define what confidence would mean for them, so that once they get those adjectives or whatever it is that they use to define that, now we can work towards those things. So now, how does that help with the self-actualization? Still talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Absolutely. So we've talked about, the physiological piece, just to kind of climb that ladder and making sure that you're not hungry, that you're not sick or in any pain. Once you check that off, and again, it's not to say that you won't ever experience challenges in either of these, but it's saying that the majority of these needs to be obtained and achieved before reaching a self-actualization. We talked about feeling safe, like you can do your job, you can get some rest at night, having that network, that connection, and how that influences self-esteem, how you feel about yourself. If you're able to provide yourself with those things and you're feeling reinforced. So again, if it's not your supervisor, administrator that's giving you the positive feedback, it's your students or could be your peers, that really reaches self-actualization. Now, one thing I will say about self-actualization is once we get there, it's not this end all be all, like you got there, I'm going to stay there. It can definitely change depending on what else is going on in your life. And so it's defined as kind of like being your most complete and authentic self. But even in that regard, I would like to say that it's really the behavior that individuals show when different challenges come that are reflective of reaching self-actualization. Like you realize that things aren't going to be perfect, that you may have times where your self-esteem is heightened and where it's not heightened. An individual that's reached self-actualization realizes that just because my supervisor or administrator said this doesn't necessarily mean it's true. With CBT, it's not the situation, it's our thoughts. Digging a little bit deeper into that theory, all negative thoughts can stem from three really basic or general thoughts. Really, when you think about it: worthlessness, helplessness, and unlovability. And so we call that like when like a different schema has been activated. And so with that, you can look at if you're experiencing one of those deeper thoughts, usually it's activated that I'm feeling worthless or that I'm feeling helpless. So my supervisor, administrator always gives me critical feedback, and there's nothing I can do about it. Now I feel helpless. And we have to kind of, just like remind ourselves that two things can be true. It can be true that I got a poor evaluation, and that doesn't mean that I'm a poor professor. It just means that in this instance, I didn't perform my best. And I think a lot of times when we haven't reached that self-actualization, anything we hear or encounter, it really influences how we see ourselves. And when you've reached self-actualization, it's just kind of like that ultimate flexibility and desire to know that, like it's a journey. And so you've accepted that the journey may not be perfect and that you may have critical moments, but you're still able to find some sort of inner peace because you realize that you're living in your purpose.
As I'm reflecting on your response, so we know that educators feel burned out from time to time. We know that some of the reasons why they feel burned out is because maybe they don't feel like they have the autonomy that they need to make those decisions in their classroom. Maybe they feel like someone else is kind of leading and guiding that who doesn't have their boots on the ground. Maybe they're feeling undervalued, which could go back to that example where you discussed about the pay. So maybe in this situation, whether you're one of those teachers that feels burned out, maybe you need to identify why you're feeling that way. And then that way you can start to create those SMART goals. And then I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning, get you someone to help you with that. Because the reality is we can't do this stuff by ourselves. So the same way we said, go see your primary care physician to help you figure out how much sleep you need so that you can always operate at your highest level self, go see a therapist and they can help you with those goals as well. So what strategies can teachers use to ensure they are meeting their own needs while also meeting the needs of students?
So definitely self-assessment. And I do believe that there is a self-care assessment link on Therapist Aid. Yes, it is. If you Google self-care assessment, Therapist Aid should be the first one that comes up. And it looks at things that you can do to manage your self-care. What I like about this screener is that it breaks it down. And this is something that's fun for people. This isn't evidence-based per se screener that, is going to tell you if you're depressed or anxious. It's just an assessment about your behaviors. So it breaks self-care down into physical and provides some options, whether it's exercise, eating regularly, resting when you're sick. It looks at the psychological and emotional self-care. So that could be, participating in hobbies, finding reasons to laugh, social self-care, which looks at, meeting new people. How often have you done that? Spiritual self-care, and then professional self-care. So improve my professional skills. I think looking at this can kind of assist the person with being reflective, because again, if we go back to a statement I said earlier, if we're naturally negative thinkers and you have to be positive on purpose, if you have a current workspace that has been kind of overwhelming for the past couple of years, if your thoughts are that things aren't going to improve, if I don't make more money, my life is going to be like this, then we have to look at what else is true. Is it true that, you aren't engaging in self-care? Well, now is probably the time to pursue greater engagement in self-care to ensure that you're tuned in with things that you need and you're doing those self-assessments. So I would say that's really the biggest thing, is doing a self-assessment to ensure you're taking care of yourself. And that list gives you ideas of things you can do. Here's another suggestion that I have is think back to the last time you were happy. Oftentimes we tell ourselves it's the situation when it's really not the situation, it's our thoughts about it. And if you think back to, I was happy at this time, think back, did you recognize you were happy? Did you appreciate that happiness? And if you do have a time that's clear, you're able to remember, think about what you were doing during that time. I'm sure you had a job, maybe you had a job that you love, but outside of your employment, what are some of the other things that you were doing that provided that? And maybe you can get back into that. I know I am a believer, and I'm not, Holy Mary or holy, Mary, Mary, where art thou type, but I do believe in God. And there was an activity that I did. This is another one that I would suggest doing with the clinician, but you all can find it free on the internet. It's the personal values card sort. And with that, it breaks values down into 3 categories: important to me, very important to me, not important. Now, there are about 80 values to choose from. And what you do during this activity is you rank your values 1 through 10 in each order. And you're going to have like about 50 left over. So it's kind of like, well, how do I decide between the not important and the discard of values that I'm not going to use? And I tell people, maybe think of a value you were taught to value that you don't. Moving to Philly, one example I realized is that there were some people that were born Christian and believed in monogamy, but if they started dating someone from a different religion that didn't practice monogamy, because that's one of the values that was in there, not important. But it can help you see like an aerial view of what you value and if your behaviors and values align, which can lead to an increased sense of satisfaction. And just to kind of highlight that a bit more, if a teacher doesn't like their pay, but they do like helping people, we just need to reinforce the positive thoughts that you are being of help. And that can also ensure that you're taking care of yourself. But with that card sort, I saw God's will was like number 1 for me. And I had relocated to a new area and hadn't found a church. And so with that, I was able to find a church, and it definitely improved my mood. So I have a lot of gems that I hope to share in the future, but I think the 3 that I've shared thus far, the sanctuary check-in, the self-care assessment, and now these personal value card sorts, I do hope that, one of the 3 will be useful to anyone listening.
I was going to ask you about some early warning signs. I think you gave us a little bit about that. If there's something more that you want to add for a teacher who is trying to determine whether or not they're at risk for burnout, please feel free. But you've definitely already given us 3 things that we can walk away and do to kind of help assess where we are. But if there's anything that you can think of in terms of early warning signs for teachers, please feel free to share now.
Absolutely. So I would say early warning signs, definitely looking at your mood, definitely looking at your sleep, and definitely looking at your appetite and your interest in things. So just kind of assessing those. A lot of times those things can be up and down. Like I may have a week where I'm eating better, so I don't want to pathologize everything, but again, these are just the signs to be mindful of. And doing that self-check-in can increase that awareness, but typically people will see changes in their mood, sleep, and their daily activities that influence things. And at that point, it may not even be that you need therapy. The next step could be that you need to add something. My father-in-law likes to say that happiness comes from the root word happening. And a lot of times when we tell ourselves we're not happy, we're also not doing things about it. But again, I liken mental health to physical health. And I've worked with people or heard people say, I've been trying everything with this diet and I'm still not losing weight. And it's like, well, this is the time to get an expert. So I am, co-signing your suggestion that if it's not something you're able to manage on your own, we are out here, we are outside, and we are ready to help. We being your therapist, your psychologist, your primary care providers, and all individuals under that helping professional umbrella. We are here.
I hope this conversation with Dr. Poole Jones gave you all some valuable insights into how Maslow's hierarchy of needs can guide us toward a healthier, more sustainable teaching journey. Remember, taking care of yourself isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. When we prioritize our well-being, we show up as better educators, better colleagues, and better humans. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow educator who could use a little encouragement. You can also connect with me on my website, www.budandbearfruit.com, and I am going to include tags for Dr. Poole Jones as well as the links that she's mentioned in today's show. I want to make sure that you guys have all of the resources that you need to truly be successful. Until next time, keep thriving, keep growing, and take care of yourself because you deserve it.